Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grayson. This is the KMG show for Friday, February the 11th, 2022. Well, yesterday was a COVID-free Thursday. Today is COVID-full Friday. Things are happening with regard to the truckers' convoys on an almost hourly basis. And I'll see if I can catch you all up. You haven't been following it or following it very closely. So, a court injunction issued about an hour ago, 2 hours ago, to remove protesters for the Ambassador Bridge, which joins Windsor, Ontario, and Detroit. Judge Morowitz says the injunction will go into effect at 7 p.m. tonight, giving protesters a chance to clear the area. This is from Jacob Lorink. He writes 45 minutes before injunction goes into effect. Crowd seems to have grown, if anything. It's also not clear if police will clear protests right at 7 or if further notice needs to be given. Protesters did a cheer vote to decide whether to stay or leave the blockade. Overwhelming majority votes to stay. Now they're singing "Oh Canada." That was from 35 minutes ago. Jacob Lorink is a business and economics reporter for the Toronto Star. And let's go to the latest news from CBC. Trudeau warns of severe consequences for anti-vaccine mandate protesters who don't stand down. Severe consequences. I wonder what that might be. This is from today at 3:42 p.m. ET. Everything is on the table because this unlawful activity has to end. We've been hearing an awful lot about the rule of law. The vaccine mandate for truckers in Canada is not a law. Parliament had nothing to do with it. This was an executive order. Trudeau said authorities are prepared to hit protesters where it hurts the most by suspending commercial trucking licenses and pursuing charges that could result in jail time. He also warned that criminal sanctions could be leveled that would stop the protesters from ever traveling internationally again. Everything is on the table because this unlawful activity has to end, and it will end. We hope these people will decide to go home. Otherwise, there will be an increasingly robust police intervention. Well, the Prime Minister said he can't say too much more about when or how this ends. He indicated that police are readying themselves now to break up demonstrations that have crippled Canada-US trade and shuttered large portions of Ottawa's downtown core. Hundreds of officers from the Ontario Provincial Police and the RCMP are en route to the affected areas. Trudeau said protesters with children should be especially concerned about the pending police action. Oh, that sounds sinister, does it not? What are they going to do to the children? Ontario declares state of emergency. Well, they declared a state of emergency over COVID-19. U.S. government offers Trudeau government help to end border blockade. Well, what are they going to do? Drop in the 82nd Airborne? Is that what's going to happen? Trudeau says almost half of protesters' funds from U.S. as they turn to Bitcoin. And of course, American money is just poison, except when it's funding environmental causes, of course. Opportunity to end convoy protest peacefully is slipping away, according to experts. Rachel Gilmore at the CSIS News Network, otherwise known as Global News, mapping the trucker convoy in Ottawa. No one's leaving here. Hang on, let me go to Pierre Poilievre, who is the sole declared candidate for the leadership of the Conservative Party of Canada. He says that he is proud of the truckers. Now, if you go to his Twitter feed, you will note that Poilievre has been rather cagey about exactly to what extent he supports the truckers. Interim conservative leader Candice Bergen, who was photographed a few days ago having pizza in a restaurant with three of the convoy leaders in Ottawa, is now declaring that they have to go home. She made this statement in the House of Commons wearing a leopard print blouse. Yes, we have a chav temporarily in charge of the Conservative Party. But I wanted to go to this. This is from a post. I don't know the author. Let me tell you a bit about how this is going to end. Excuse me. By way of background, I'm a mathematician with a specialization in applied mathematics of social interactions, such as game theory. I'm what you would probably describe as glowy adjacent. I hope I've got the lingo correct. The problem Trudeau has is that he has few narrowly circumscribed bases of power that are enough to get elected, but not enough to govern against the will of the people. Those are very different things. So that leaves him with very serious limits on what he can accomplish in this situation. The truckers are smart. They did not all converge on Ottawa, but rather organize themselves locally and create many small spots of trouble. In quantitative studies of insurgency, this is the ink spot model, local decentralized warfare that relies on local support. Quite simply, this is for the truckers to lose. If they can outlast the government, which may mean as little as another week, they will break it. Trudeau needs to win every interaction to stay in power. All the truckers have to do is not lose. A draw is always in their favor, and the situation in most places right now is a draw at best. The Mounties huff and puff, but have not been able to deal with or disperse a single protest. That's not unsurprising, by the way. Truckers use a method originally devised for naval warfare called block shipping, sinking ships to block a strategic narrows or harbor entrance. There is literally no economical way of dealing with this tactic. Trudeau knows this. Their worst case scenario, losing their jobs and their trucks by just walking away, still imposes a massive cost on the government. When the worst case scenario is that both you and your opponent lose, you have everything to gain. There is no dominant strategy here for Trudeau. There's no clear way to victory anymore for him. It's all about how badly he loses now. And we have this. Oh, yes, this is Candice Bergen. No, not that Candice Bergen. The woman who decided, in her 40s that she was going to change her name to Candice Bergen. Trudeau urges opposition members to denounce protests and meeting late Thursday, and Candice Bergen tweeted that she was just so very grateful that the Prime Minister of Canada spared her, a few minutes of her time. I see that Melissa Lantsman is in this story. Melissa Lantsman, now an MP, or just very briefly for now, an MP, is one of the leaders of the gay PR spiv cabal that controls the Conservative Party. And the fact that she has jumped so quickly to support Pierre Poilievre, and that, he was lauding her on Twitter today, suggests to me that if he takes over the party, then the gay PR spiv cabal will continue to control the Conservative Party. According to CBC, Lantsman, the party's transport critic, was a vocal defender of the convoy's early efforts to force the federal government to abandon the vaccine mandate for cross-border truckers. She has since soured on the movement as the protests have spread to critical border crossings. They need to move from the blockades. That's illegal, whether it's on a bridge or whether it's a pipeline or a highway. We can't have them blocking critical infrastructure, Lantsman said. I think we need a plan from the Prime Minister on how to end this. And let's talk a little bit about Maxime Bernier, who is the leader of the People's Party of Canada. They hold no seats in Canada, but they got 5 to 6% of the vote in the last election, which shocked and horrified a great many people. I see trouble for Bernier if Poilievre becomes leader of the Conservative Party, because, we have a populist in charge of the Conservative Party. Poilievre is not a populist. He is a political hack. He was elected first at the tender age of 25. after spending the previous years in university and being a backroom boy. He is from Alberta, and he makes a great deal of that. But despite the fact that he was born and raised and educated in Alberta, he decided to run for office in Ottawa. Why did he do that? Well, I would guess the reason why is that since he was a young boy, he determined that he was going to become Prime Minister of Canada by first becoming leader of the Conservative Party. And the Conservatives having another leader from the province of Alberta would not look good. So he ran in Ottawa and he won. So let's see what Bernier has to say. I believe he has some rally for the truckers tomorrow. Let's see, 10 a.m. Sunday at the Terry Fox statue, 90 Wellington Street, which is the street the House of Commons is on. Ottawa pancake breakfast. Come meet me and show your support for the Truckers for Freedom at our pancake breakfast Sunday morning in Ottawa. And here he quotes Gandhi: civil disobedience becomes a sacred duty when the state becomes lawless or corrupt. He said, I said they had a choice between doubling down on the demonization and the repression or de-escalating and ending the crisis. Ford Nation, that's Doug Ford, who is the Premier of Ontario, has decided to go down in history as the despot who cracked down on peaceful protesters fighting for our freedoms. And, oh, yes, let's go to the chat. I'm going to speak at some length about Justin Trudeau and exactly what kind of man he is. Hello to Chogokin 666 article I saw today: why the truckers aren't really the working class spoiler because they own their trucks. Yeah, they own their trucks in the sense that you own your home. You know, when you sign up for an $800,000 mortgage. Yes, these truckers, the owner haulers, as opposed to the staff drivers, yes, they take out enormous mortgages, as much as $500,000 for their trucks. But no, they're part of the evil bourgeois class, according to the bougie left. Yo Mama says that's always the problem with Marxism. They hate it when the workers actually own the means of their production, hence the kulaks. Hello to Dan, a no sleep till Breezewood, PA, who says, important to remember Bronze Age pervert words of communism. It's feelings of resentment rather than actual ideology. Hello to Jeff Godley, and thank you. Hello to Tom Anderson, John S., Oscar Toe. So to be an official worker, you can't own anything, he asks. Thank you for your kind words, John S. I will be talking later, Chogokin 666, about the new appointment to the nuclear sanitation and storage. Is Trudeau sending in the military now, says Oscar Toe? There was a rumor going around this week that he asked the military to intervene and they said no. Who knows? Hello to Tyrone Jackson, who says Trudeau should return to his Cuban family. Well, Twitter sent out a fact check saying that, yes, the facts is that Justin Trudeau is actually the son of Pierre Trudeau and not, as some have claimed, Fidel Castro, which led many wags on Twitter to say it's official now. Castro was Trudeau's father. Hello to Anrun. Yo Mama says this reminds me of how Soviet coal miners could say what others couldn't because they knew how vital they were. Hello to Zen Master Football Analysis. And Dr. Deadname says Trudeau couldn't even face the protesters if he had come off as an actual leader, but he went into hiding, which is pathetic. Tyrone Jackson quotes Tim Scott, who says we need the private sector create jobs. If the government create jobs, communism would have worked, but it didn't. Jonathan Ferguson, hello, says, I've been to the protest on the Hill every day for 14 days. The only downside has been the main stage where they play communist anthems like Imagine instead of I Will Not Comply or Am I the Only One? I mentioned in the past that when I've gone to these protests in the legislature in Victoria, British Columbia, Yes, many, many Beatles songs, many, many John Lennon songs. Jeff Godley says that Twitter fact check definitely changed my mind. So very convincing. Joe Ken 666 says, I just want to take this time to thank Kevin and our erudite chat for all the great resources. And hello to Quachalongo. Let's talk about Justin Trudeau. You may have heard that he believes that Canada is the first post-national country, which is very close to what Yves Martel, the Booker Prize winning author from Quebec, who praised Canada. This was praised as the best hotel on earth. This is a story from Amy Minsky at Global News from June 30th, 2017. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said he is jealous of immigrants to Canada and their families who, he said, have more of a stake in the country than others. Urge to something in Minecraft growing. Anytime I meet people who got to make the deliberate choice, whose parents chose Canada, I'm jealous, he said in an interview with CTV, because I think being able to choose it rather than being Canadian by default is an amazing attachment. Statement of attachment to Canada. The Canada 150 celebrations also come amid security concerns and heightened tensions and hate crimes targeted at some ethnic groups in particular. Yes, of course. Of course it would be. People go to these stupid Canada Day celebrations to have, flags painted on their face and to watch the fireworks. Or last Canada Day, to destroy statues of people like John A. Macdonald and Captain James Cook. I always sort of laugh when you see people who are, not many of them, but intolerant, who think, go back to your own country. Trudeau said, no, you chose this country. This is your country more than it is for others because we take it for granted. Yes, he does not like Canadians. Oikophobia. He prefers foreigners because foreigners are just so much better than people who have actually, whose families actually made this country. Steve Saylor had a piece on truckers on October 5th, 2019, which is relevant to this discussion. From the Toronto Globe and Mail, how an immigration scheme steers newcomers into Canadian trucking jobs and put lives at risk. Immigration consultants and trucking firms with sketchy safety records have found ways to exploit foreign job seekers, sometimes with tragic results when unprepared drivers are sent out onto the road, a Globe investigation finds. Yes, and they talked to someone, Mahan Singh, who remembers feeling terrified he would lose control on an icy highway and kill someone. Singh, who comes from Amritsar, had never experienced ice or snow. He'd never considered being a truck driver either, but Canadian immigration consultants told him that getting experience in trucking could help him qualify for permanent residency. So, a year ago, he got a license and found a company to work in Surrey, BC. Singh says he had to give $10,000 in cash to GLT Transportation just to get hired, then put up with perilous working conditions for weeks on end. I had 2 minor accidents in the first 4 months, he says. In my 6-month driving period, I was only in Surrey 8 to 10 days. Always we sleep on the road. He has since found a better employer, but he is still appalled that a country like Canada allows reckless trucking companies to send nervous, unprepared newcomers like him out on the highway. Quote, everything is supposed to be by the rules in Canada, but then when I start work, I find out that there are no rules. Yes, Sailor comments, tropical truck drivers versus Canadian ice and snow. What can possibly go wrong? Sikh truck drivers are recognized both in Canada and increasingly in the United States, with many examples of terrible accidents and multiple deaths, as in when a hockey team was killed in Saskatchewan, as being menaces. But they are foreigners, which makes them better. This is from the Council of European Canadians. Justin Trudeau scheming to replace white misogynistic and racist truckers with immigrant Indians. Oh, yes, and here's a picture of him embracing a drag queen. There are many, many such pictures. Undisclosed sources have notified CEC that the Trudeau government is planning to totally diversify the Canadian trucking business and jobs with Indian immigrants. Pushing Euro-Canadian men out of the trucking profession is nothing new. According to a 2016 census, 16% of all Canadian truckers were already of South Asian origin. Justin already has in the works immigration schemes to steer newcomers into Canadian trucking jobs. A Globe and Mail investigation has indeed discovered that young foreign nationals are routinely steered into trucking by some immigration consultants in collaboration with particular trucking firms. Both take cash payoffs from recruits in exchange for jobs, even though that practice is illegal. Trudeau does not care that the novice drivers, coming primarily from India, a nation with a dismal history of car accidents, are often unable to decipher Canadian road signs or handle the trucks properly before being sent out onto the roads. There are now many documented cases of inexperienced Indian drivers having deadly crashes and near misses across Canada. Who can forget the 16 members of the Humboldt Broncos hockey team who were killed by an Indian truck driver in a crash on a Saskatchewan highway? But this has not deterred Canadian immigration officials from enticing thousands and thousands of Indians to take trucking jobs away from racist Canadians. Almost all these Indian truckers have chosen to stay out of the Freedom Convoy protests, believing the protests to have been hijacked by right-wing white men. Jagrup Singh, who is head of the Ontario Aggregate Trucking Association, told the Globe and Mail, "In fact, we don't even know who the organizers of this protest are. No one asked us if we agreed with their demands." Indian Punjabis, who love to brag about how they are, quote, dominating the Canadian trucking industry, are already thinking about their opportunities to take the jobs of Euro-Canadian truckers who are fired for protesting Justin's COVID mandates. India is currently the greatest source of immigrants to Canada, as Forbes magazine reported back in 2020. Indians immigrated to Canada at an astonishing rate. During 2021, when Euro-Canadians were prohibited to leave their homes without vaccine passports, Canada welcomed the most immigrants in a single year in its history, over 400,000, most brought in a rush in the middle of the night without proper vaccination papers. In anticipation of his plan to bring millions of Indian immigrants, Justin was seen a few years ago shaking his leg to the Bhangra dance number in a program of Indian-Canadian Association of Montreal. Let's see. Don't be surprised then that undisclosed sources are informing the Council of European Canadians that Justin is calling for intensification in the immigration of Indians so that they can take over the trucking industry, and that is away from Euro-Canadian, quote, misogynistic extremist men. Justin says that Indians come from a culture that appreciates women, despite the fact that the statistics show that Indians' abuse of women is the biggest human rights violation on earth. And this is also from the Council of European Canadians. Justin Trudeau says about the truckers, that's not who Canadians are. This is by Ricardo Duchesne. And here is Justin Trudeau at yet another Pride parade with a wet shirt, gurning horribly, waving his arm and waving one of those rainbow Canadian flags. After hiding for a week, Justin came out yesterday to condemn yet again the truckers by declaring that they are not who Canadians are. About a year ago, Justin said that the third world immigrants were more Canadian than Euro-Canadian natives. In the globalist world Justin inhabits, the Euro-Canadian working class is the most despised group. Before the 1980s, the left used to advocate for the working class, both the Liberal Party and the NDP. Now it is all about diversity, inclusion, and equity. Of course, die. The manly fortitude, family-oriented values, respect for traditions, nationalist sympathies, and rejection of welfarism of the working class is something intensely disliked by the emasculated left. Yes, and in the midst of the worst housing crisis in Canadian history, Justin Trudeau is bringing 1.2 million permanent residents over 3 years to Canada. Now, keep in mind, the number of Canadians, foreigners admitted to Canada every year is much, much higher, several times higher than 400,000. And a great many of these people who are supposed to leave never leave. And it is difficult, if not impossible, to remove people who are in our country if they don't want to go. And oh, yes, many Americans have become interested in what's going on with the truckers, not least Matty Iglesias. or Matt Iglesias, or whatever we're supposed to call him. He tweeted, "Send the Marines to Detroit and clear the bridge." The Marines, eh? Herman Cortez, who follows me on Twitter, said, "Marines, are you nuts?" Kron says, "Matty, you gloriously absurd twat waffle, never change." Everyone loves tacos says, "I'm glad Matty Iglesias has made it perfectly clear he would have called the Marines in during the famous 1934 Minneapolis general strike, always against the working man and with the big corporate and political interest." Of course, Iglesias works for the Niskanen Center, where he's a senior center. And to the best of my recollection, the Niskanen Center is part of the Coctopus, the Koch or Koch brothers. Yeah. So we know which side his bread is buttered on. And he had made a curious comment on Twitter about the value of using trucks for political reasons. And let me bring it up here. He wrote, "People on foot blocking traffic for short periods of time isn't great, but society survives it happening because it's a fairly ineffective tactic." This is from today, one day after the previous tweet. "The truck blockade is more potent and would be a great tactic for bringing down a dictator. Exactly why democracies can't tolerate it." Carl Andreas Anton Nigger responded, "Please go on, Matty." But no, these truckers are bad, because they're not Democrats. And we know how democracy works. The good guys always win. And if the good guys, that is to say progressives, don't win, if they are behind in the ballot count, say, or electoral votes, that means the election was stolen. That's what we were told in 2016 by the Democrats, also in 2004 and also 2000. But you get yourself kicked off social media for talking about someone else claiming an election was stolen. But the Democrats, like Stacey Abrams, they can get away with it. This is from Lindsay Kornick at Fox News. CNN analyst Juliet Kayyem suggested aggressive means to end the trucker post on Canada on Thursday. Yes. What did she tweet? The convoy protest, applauded by right-wing media. Boo! As a freedom protest is an economic and security issue now. The Ambassador Bridge link constitutes 28% of annual trade movement between U.S. and Canada. Slash the tires, empty gas tanks, arrest the drivers, and move the trucks. Okay. It's going to make it rather difficult to remove those trucks if you've slashed the tires. Also, as someone has pointed out, there is no button inside the cab of these trucks that says eject fuel. Kayyem continued, "Trust me, I will not run out of ways to make this hurt. Cancel their insurance, suspend their driver's licenses, prohibit any future regulatory certification for truckers, etc. Have we learned nothing? These things fester when there are no consequences." So what do we know about this woman? I'll get to that in just a minute. This is from Kane at Citizen Free Press. Oh, it turns out that she had tweeted back in 2020, when Trump was still president in the summer, "We now know Trump wanted 10,000 active troops deployed." That would be in Washington. Dangerous? Yes. Ahistorical? Certainly. Legal? Only if, like Trump, you see lawful protests with pockets of violence as an insurrection. In other words, Antifa and Black Lives Matter, good. Working class, bad. The ties between Black Lives Matter and the COVID crisis are not just about its disproportionate impact on minority communities. Coronavirus exposed a federal government so morally unsound, so dysfunctional, so not capable of the moment that protest became a citizen's duty. She tweeted this on June the 9th, 2020. But what do we know about this woman? Let's just say that she glows in the dark so brightly that she could probably be seen from space. She is described by Wiki thus: born August 1969, as a former bureaucrat, author, and host of the WGBH podcast, the SCIF. She serves as a national security analyst for CNN and is a weekly guest on Boston Public Radio. She is the Belfer Lecturer in International Security at the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard and a member of the Council of Foreign Relations and the Pacific Council on International Policy. The Kennedy School at Harvard. It's a terrible place full of terrible, terrible people. She began her legal career in 1995 at the Department of Justice, ultimately serving as an advisor to then Attorney General Janet Reno until 1999. It seems that Juliette Kayyem is looking for another Waco on the International Bridge. You know, her old boss, Janet Reno, would have gassed the truckers. Perhaps that's in the cards. Yes, and various claims have been made about her regarding her involvement in security software, surveillance software. Kayyem serves as a senior advisor to NSL Group, an Israeli technology firm known for its Pegasus spying tool. The company is reported to provide spying software that has been used in targeted attacks against human rights activists and journalists in various countries and played a role in the murder of Saudi dissident Jamal Khashoggi. On October 21st, 2019, Kayyem was hired as an opinion contributor by the Washington Post, where Khashoggi worked as a columnist. Observers pointed out the problematic nature of the hire. The director of Citizen Lab, a laboratory that studies human rights abuses and technology, told Forbes at the time, quote, "It's a sad day for human rights, a deeply disturbing irony in the wake of Khashoggi's execution and a public relations victory for NSO Group to have the Washington Post hire someone sitting on their advisory board," unquote. Facing mounting criticism, Kayyem stepped down from her Washington Post role just 4 days later without clarifying her role at NSO Group. And Ontario imposed a state of emergency. Yes, after report it considered dropping mandates. And Quebec, well, you know, we have just been issuing these executive orders again and again and again and again. So much for so-called democracy. This is from the Canadian Press. Ontario's opposition parties are accusing the Quebec government of taking too long to give up COVID-19 emergency powers, and they say the delay is helping Premier François Legault and his ministers avoid scrutiny. Earlier this week, the government renewed the state of emergency for the 99th time since March 2020. Premier Legault told reporters the emergency order would be lifted only once a bill is passed, allowing the government to keep some powers, such as the ability to impose the vaccine passport system and mask mandates. You know, I was talking a couple of days ago about governments getting power and new powers and never relinquishing them. This is from CBC News. Ontario court freezes access to funds raised for protest convoy on Give, Send, Go platform. First, GoFundMe froze it twice and then said the truckers are not getting the money. And so they switched to Give, Send, Go, and there has been a court order from the Ontario Superior Court of Justice. Ivana Yelich, a spokesperson for the Premier, said the order binds any and all parties with possession or control over these donations. Convoy organizers quickly set up a campaign on Christian fundraising site Give, Send, Go after donors initially raised more than $10 million through the crowdfunding platform GoFundMe. GoFundMe said it would stop payments to convoy organizers and refund donors directly because the protest violates its rules on violence and harassment. And so what does Give, Send, Go have to say about this diktat from the Ontario court? The company tweeted, "Know this, Canada has absolutely zero jurisdiction over how we manage our funds here at Give, Send, Go. All funds for every campaign on Give, Send, Go flow directly to the recipients of those campaigns, not least of which is the Freedom Convoy campaign." Of course, we're hearing from the Canadian government that, Yeah, we're going to have to do something about banking laws because of this. Yeah, how about that? How about that? Yeah, they have money laundering and, drug dealers and truckers. They're all the same, right? They're all the same. Oh, in Karen news, this is from Kane, a Citizen Free Press. Ottawa police visit women's home over a Facebook post supporting trucker convoy. And there is video of this with a small, pleasant looking young woman in the uniform of the Ontario Provincial Police. OPP officer in Ontario pays visit to personal residence after noting she commented on anti-mandate protest, admits to monitoring online activity. This is from Unacceptable Rowan at on Twitter. Oh yes. Oh, this is not really the Canadian thing to do. The Canadian thing to do is just to accept anything the government mandates because peace, order, good government, all that sort of thing. And you don't want to be un-Canadian, do you? Brian Lee Crowley of the MacDonald Laurier Institute writes, "We undermine the neutrality of the law at our peril. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. When the law is used to promote or shield specific causes or interests, people only obey the law when it's convenient to do so. The way that the courts have been running interference for radical environmentalists in my country for over 30 years? Okay, illegal blockade by environmentalists or Native Indians. Police don't do anything. The company or whoever gets an injunction. Nothing happens. Then the company or whoever has to go back to court to get an order to enforce the injunction, and whether that's going to be enforced or not, well, sometimes. One law for all or no law for at all. This is the stark choice we face in a democracy like Canada today. The issue is raised by truckers' protests about COVID restrictions, but the identical issue is raised by Ferry Creek, Caledonia, the burning of churches on reserves, blockades of pipeline construction or of highways and railways, to pick just a few examples. The truckers tend to have the support of a lot of conservatives and are opposed by a lot of Liberals and New Democrats. The reverse is true of a number of other issues listed above. So far, so good. This is the stuff of legitimate partisan division. But unnoticed by many is the subtle interweaving of the political dimension and the rule of law. Yeah, okay. Rule of law. There's no rule of law in my country because the law is whatever the courts say that it is. There was a law in Canada against abortion. And the law, one had to go to a committee, a hospital committee, in order to be approved for abortion. And a fellow, Canada's greatest ever baby killer, a man called Henry Morgenthaler, he just kept on killing babies at his clinic in Montreal. And finally, this case went to the Supreme Court of Canada. And later, the Chief Justice said, well, there was really nothing legally against these, abortion committees, but we decided that we didn't like it. So we got rid of it. Yes, that's how the law works in Canada. Crowley, managing director of the MacDonald Laurier Institute, concludes the rule of law is not an instrument of authoritarianism, but of freedom when it is applied without fear or favor. Yes, they had the law in the Soviet Union as well. It is a measure of the corruption of the understanding of the rule of law in today's Canada that almost no one in the political party seems capable of articulating, that there is no contradiction between supporting demonstrators' demands and requiring that they respect the law. If you want an example of how to do it right, the best example in the recent memory of lawful, respectful, peaceful, yet powerful protests that changed Canadian politics was the Idle No More movement. Well, it's one of the stupidest names for a protest group ever. These were Native Indians. Idle No More. The planted axiom there was that previously Indians were idle, which is a common slur used against Native Indians in my country, that they're idle and feckless. No, but see, they're the right kind of protesters. And let's see what Jim Kunstler has to say. His column this morning at kunstler.com, Dishonesty is a Bad Business Plan. And he begins with a quotation from Grace Curley at The Spectator. Perhaps for the ruling class, the only thing that would be more terrifying than seeing children go to school without masks is the idea of losing elections. Kunstler begins, the whopping untruths launched onto the people of Western Civ by their governments reformatted the brains of millions so badly that they shuffled obediently into a mass formation and ran over a buffalo jump. What a stampede it has been. But suddenly, the remaining buffaloes are balking at the cliff's edge, seeing the bodies pile up below. Some of the bulls have even turned the other way and started charging back across the darkling prairie at the creatures driving the herd with their klaxons of deceit. All authority from Vienna to Vancouver stands revealed as psychopathic. It apparently seeks to kill and injure as many as possible. Talk about the needle and the damage done. The most mysterious element of the story, of course, is what motivated the various actors in this accursed melodrama. You could start by asking Dr. Anthony Fauci why he suggested this week the need for yet another round of the same mRNA booster shots that already proved completely ineffective against the Omicron generation of coronavirus. And then he makes a claim I'd like to, but I can't. Each successive shot sends a fresh cargo of toxic artificial spike proteins into the bloodstream, which remain at work for more than a year, insidiously gumming up the capillaries of vital organs and throwing toggle switches into the coded proteins of immune systems that turn off the body's natural defenses against a panoply of diseases, including cancers. The life insurance companies are starting to notice and squawk about the astounding rise in all-causes mortality. Fauci, of course, has an entire career of public health malpractice to cover up. In his quest for medical immortality, he bungled the institutional response to the AIDS epidemic, introducing toxic drug protocols still inexplicably in use today, namely AZT, which got FDA approval despite its botched 1986 phase 2 trials. Next, Fauci attempted a miracle cure for the terrifying Ebola virus, remdesivir. More botched trials. Anyway, the drug didn't work against Ebola, but he hauled that out again for his crowning creation, COVID-19, and got the NIH to anoint remdesivir as the standard of care for hospital inpatients, at the same time that he got the bureaucracy to ban and demonize effective early treatment protocols, including ivermectin and HCQ, while pushing his next-gen miracle cure, the mRNA vaccines, which also flunked their rushed, inept trials. Remdesivir provokes renal failure in 5 days, leading to fluid buildup in the lungs, and the doctors were unable to discern the deadly side effects from the supposed symptoms of COVID-19 itself. What's more, the public health authorities gave a $17,000 bonus to hospitals for each course of remdesivir given, and additional cash for reporting deaths as COVID-related. Quite a racket. The net result is I can't repeat that either. Henceforth, doctors will have to battle strenuously against being regarded as dangerous quacks, while the entire scaffold of conglomerate hospitals and group practices founders and falls. You have no idea what a shitstorm of lawsuits is barreling towards the medical establishment when the fog of propaganda finally lifts and the public can see what has been perpetrated against it. The Democratic Party rode this public health fiasco into power and has abused its prerogatives exorbitantly in its quest for power without purpose, other than for more power to push people around. And then he makes a claim about the 2020 presidential election, which I cannot repeat. He concludes, the uprising of Canadian truckers inspires a general resistance to being pushed around by overreaching elected officials and their bureaucratic subalterns. And the truckers' example is being followed over Western Civ. Wait until the American truckers get into the act, representing a vast class of citizens who have taken a beating for more than 2 years and increasingly have nothing to lose. Following the lame, coordinated campaign to discredit Joe Rogan, the Democrats and their accomplices in the news media went into a desperate pivot this week, attempting brazenly to pretend that they can walk away from what amounts to their, I can't repeat that. The midterm elections loom darkly. Not only can they be kicked out of legislative power, but there's an excellent chance that their hapless grifter president, Joe Biden, can be impeached and convicted by a new Congress for bribery and treason, and the vice president along with him for high crimes, leading to the installation of a new Speaker of the House, not a Democrat, as president. Between the congressional investigations that would follow and the appointment of a new Attorney General, the prosecutions can commence and the country can begin the rehabilitation of its conscience. Let's take a look at chat. Oh, we're talking about D-Day. Halper says, hello. The Canadians and Brits got the easier zones, Juno and Sword. U.S. hit Omaha, the best defended one. I can't wait until KMG leaves YouTube, says Yo Mama. Neither can I, but I need the security of a permanent residence before that happens, which will happen soon. I mean, it must happen soon because all of us monthlies are being evicted as of the end of this month. So that's quite an incentive. What else do we have here? Hello to David the Known. No, rather. Hello to Gordon Azazio. Take control of the GOP so they can't jump in bed with the totalitarian left. I mean, Trump's been working at it. A lot of these GOP hacks are retiring. The problem with the GOP is it's hard to kill. Or it's hard to transform. Oh, yes. Oh, I am such a man of the people, but they're not. They're not. They say these things seeking to get elected. I mean, look at John McCain. Build the damn wall, he said. End Obamacare. And then, of course, after he was reelected for the final time, even as he was dying, yes, he decided to spit in the face of Trump, a man who could have ousted him from office by backing his primary opponent. One hopes that Trump learned a lesson from this. Does the Black Québécois have a position on the truckers as choking 666? Not to the best. I don't know. But that. Trudeau would never talk tough like this if it was so-called First Nations, says choking 666. Well, yes, indeed. Can the Indigenous Canadians get in on this like they did last year, blockading railways? Oh, they might try. The funny thing is after COVID started up, suddenly no one was interested in this wailing of the Indigenous, which never ceases. And then a hoax was created. Mass graves, murders in the middle of the night, dumping bodies in the mass graves. There's no evidence of it. None. Zero. No. Newt. Nada. Slashing semi-tires is harder and more dangerous than regular tires, says John S. Yes, many people have pointed this out. British American, hello, says, I see a potential weakness in the truckers' position, though they have pledged not to resist arrest. Clearly, then, they are relying on a legal strategy in the event that they are removed. You're sailing close to the wind, KMG. Be careful, says Alrodion Raskolnikov. I will be as careful as I can. Iglesias, tough guy, says a British American. Yes, indeed. Please, no more Lenin, says Dennis Dale. Yeah. He was an IRA supporter, was John Lennon. And he was also a supporter of a psychopath from Trinidad, Michael X, who started his career in politics, if you will, as an enforcer for a London gangster, a blockbusting. It was called Peter Rockman was the man's name. And there's been about 3 movies made about Peter Rockman, which is quite remarkable. One of them is called Scandal, which is pretty good, actually. Now, Matt Taibbi is not a right-winger. He is on the left. What does he have to say about this? One of his Substacks was reprinted at Zero Hedge. He calls this Justin Trudeau's Ceausescu moment. On the morning of December 21st, 1989, Romanian General Secretary Nicolae Ceausescu was in a foul mood. The Berlin Wall had fallen, and Mikhail Gorbachev and George H.W. Bush had recently announced the end of the Cold War, marking the end of Ceausescu's rule inevitable, though he couldn't see this yet. Worse, his security leaders had just failed to violently put down protests in the city of Timisoara, a fact that enraged his wife, Elena. You should have fired on them, and had they fallen, you should have taken them and shoved them into a cellar, she said. Why weren't you told that? Along one of the world's most vicious dictators, Ceausescu's recent plan for winning over the heartland was forcing half the country's villagers to destroy their own homes with pickaxes and hammers if they couldn't afford a bulldozer, and packing them into project apartments in the new agro-industrial towns for a better future. Despite this, in his long history of murder, terror, and spying, Ceausescu to the end did not grasp that his unpopularity had an organic character. He was convinced ethnically Hungarian terrorists were behind the latest trouble. After reaching the balcony of Bucharest's Central Committee building to give a speech that December day, he is genuinely surprised when the crowd turns on him. When he tells them to be quiet, he's befuddled by the refusal, saying, "What, can't you hear?" Elena jumps in and yells, "Silence!" To which Ceausescu hilariously replies, "Shut up." The crowd listens to neither of them. Well, we know how this ends, with the both of them pushed up against a wall and shot. And Taibbi says there may be no real world comparison between a blood-soaked monster like Ceausescu and a bumbling ball scratcher like Joe Biden, or an honorarium gobbling technocrat like Hillary Clinton, or a handsome Dan investment banker like Emmanuel Macron, or an effete pseudo-intellectual like Justin Trudeau. Still, the ongoing inability of these leaders to see the math of populist uprisings absolutely recalls that infamous scene in Bucharest. From Brexit to the election of Donald Trump to now the descent of thousands of Canadian truckers upon the Canadian capital city of Ottawa to confront Trudeau, a consistent theme has been the refusal to admit, not even to us, but to themselves, the numerical truth of what they're dealing with. Trudeau is becoming the ultimate example. Truckers last month began protesting a January 22nd rule that required the production of vaccine passports before crossing the U.S.-Canadian border. Canadian truckers are reportedly 90% vaccinated, above the country's 78% total, a key detail that's been brazenly ignored by media in both countries, determined to pick these more as anti-vax than anti-mandate protests, which seem to be about many things at once, but that's another story. When an angry convoy descended upon the Capitol, Trudeau dismissed them in a soliloquy that can only be described as inspired political arson. Quote, "The small fringe minority of people who are on their way to Ottawa who are holding unacceptable views that they are expressing do not represent the views of Canadians who know that following the science and stepping up to protect each other is the best way to ensure our rights, our freedoms, our values as a country," unquote. Taibbi comments, a near exact repeat of the basket of deplorables episode. Trudeau's imperious description of unacceptable views instantly became a rallying cry, with people across the country lining the streets to cheer truckers while identifying as the small fringe minority. Everyone from high school kids to farmers and teachers and random marchers carrying jerry cans of fuel joined in as Trudeau's own words were used to massively accelerate his trouble. Trudeau fled the city, removing his family to what aides called a secret location for security reasons. A politically disastrous move denounced by just about everyone with a microphone or a Twitter account, including members of his own party. Liberal MP Joel Lightbound took things a step further. He ripped Trudeau's politics as divisive, saying his government needs to recognize people have legitimate concerns, while adding acidly, quote, "Not everyone can earn a living on a MacBook at a cottage," unquote. Ouch. This has been a theme in the States too, where the people most dickishly insistent on the necessity of lockdowns or mandates have tended to be Zoomer professionals spending the pandemic in pajamas. Meanwhile, in a hilarious third-rate spoof version of American conventional wisdom, when Canadians try to imitate American pretensions, does it not ever not end in a cringe-worthy cell phone? CBC announcer Nick Coxell went on air January 28th and suggested the trucker protests were a Russian concoction. She told a public safety minister, Marco Mendicino, given Canada's support of Ukraine in this current crisis with Russia, there is concern that Russian actors could be continuing to fuel things as this protest grows, or perhaps even instigating it from the outside. Taibbi says, the Russians must be fabulous organizers, as they not only managed to turn out big numbers to participate in the Freedom Convoy, but prevailed upon towing companies across the country to refuse orders to have the trucks removed from Ottawa. The RCMP reportedly also tried to get such companies to remove trucks from another blockade in Alberta, and they were refused there too. The incredible thing about politicians like Trudeau, Matt Taibbi says, is that they genuinely seem sure their opposition is limited to small extremist pockets. They simply don't believe how many people hate them and are continually flabbergasted to discover that insults and authoritarian tactics don't improve their situations. There's a narcissistic personality disorder element to this, where some polls seem unable to imagine that a sane person would feel anything but admiration and respect toward them. This in turn means their detractors can't merely be wrong, but must be abnormal or literally defective people somehow, seduced by foreign spies or driven by criminal or politically illegitimate impulses. This is how we get to a place where over half of America is reflexively denounced as racist or white supremacist, another brilliant American political fashion adopted by Trudeau, who last year denounced anti-vaxxers as, quote, misogynists and racist, unquote, in a bold move, considering his own blackface history. This is much longer, this piece, but I'll just leave it with that. You see these tremendous stresses on the left now between the, I don't know, the alphabet people, intersectional left, and those members of the left who still have an interest in what we used to call the working class. Carl Denninger at marketticker.org writes, never has there been a virus that once you get it, you don't have durable immunity to that specific virus. Yes, viruses mutate. Some mutate so much, e.g. HIV, that vaccination is basically impossible. It doesn't work. All attempts to vaccinate against coronavirus in the past have failed for this reason as well. We know the current jabs, for example, wane off in about 6 months' time, becoming statistically worthless, and even faster if a new mutation shows up, e.g. Omicron. The scream fest has been that, oh, if you had COVID, you'll get it again, so you need the jab. There was never any evidence for this claim. Yes, and Prince Charles got COVID, and then he got the 3 jabs, and then he got COVID again. What does that tell you? About differing efficacies of differing kinds of immunity. Denninger continues, indeed, the CDC has admitted that among those who had COVID, the jabs provide no statistically significant improvement in protection whatsoever. And yesterday, or 2 days ago, I really hate being right. And the spike protein, it persists for weeks in lymph node germinal centers in human patients. How about that? Remember that mRNA is not a new technology. Moderna has been trying to commercialize it for about a decade now for various indications, including cancer. Cancer, of course, is a disease where very high risks are tolerated because the alternative is basically always death, and any sort of bad thing is better than the death. But they've never made it work. The reason is that every time they had enough dose to get the results, they also got toxicity. The injected stuff got broken down too fast otherwise, and if you raised the dose, the toxicity went up enough that you couldn't get an effect without screwing the patient. That is the history of mRNA until now. It's why it has never been deployed in human disease before. It's not for lack of trying. And, I talked about GoFundMe. Yes, various attempts to aid the truckers shut down by companies or by government. And here's a very sad story from Melissa Coteau-Zuber at the Canadian Press. Lifting restrictions could cause anxiety for many as unknowns persist, experts say. In the back of our mind, there's this niggling anxiety of, are we doing this too soon? It's always going to be too soon for these quivering wrecks. It will take time for many to adjust, but the quick approach some provinces are taking could make the transition more jarring. Alberta ended its vaccine certificate system Wednesday, days before its mask requirements for students is set to drop, while Saskatchewan plans to do away with its vaccine mandate on Monday. Other provinces, including Ontario, have taken a more gradual approach to dismantling COVID-19 measures. Steve Jordan's, a psychology professor at the University of Toronto, says it's natural for people to feel conflicted as restrictions ease. Though many are tired of the mandates aimed at slowing the spread of the virus, there's still some underlying fear. We're all weathering the same storm, but we're doing so in very different boats. Oh, shut up. We are not all weathering the same storm. Oh, what? I don't have to go to work? I don't have to battle the traffic? I can sit at home I don't have to put on a jacket. I don't even have to put on pants. And I get to work that way. Of course, not much work is going to be done, but, and this shows that my job is basically otiose, but I'm still cashing those paychecks. Well, I'm not cashing them. They're put directly into my account twice a month. Life is good. After 2 years of being told to avoid the virus, it will be hard for some people to switch their mindset, Jordan says. Mass formation psychosis, in other words. A limited PCR testing, which previously helped indicate how much COVID-19 was circulating, adds another complicated wrinkle. A complicated wrinkle. Ooh. By removing some of the information people use to weigh their own risk. Jordan expects the majority of people, even those who feel initial stress around reopening, will resume previous social interactions in public settings quite easily. Yeah, we'll see about that. But others, including people with conditions that make them more vulnerable, will have a harder time. Sarah Berra, a mother of 2 in Calgary, says she's feeling particularly anxious about her 8 and 11-year-old children going to class with unmasked peers next week. Barra, who had COVID-19 in December 2020, says she's feeling long COVID symptoms, including crushing levels of fatigue, and worries about potential long-term impacts if her kids get infected. Yeah, even if the sanitary dictatorship is swept away, one thing that's not going to be swept away is this bogus disease called long COVID. It is the new ME, the new fibromyalgia, the new chronic fatigue syndrome. A cartoon villain, Jagmeet Singh, leader of the New Democratic Party, says that Trudeau's performance, the convoy, is completely unacceptable. Well, I guess that's what you'd expect, from a nation which is the majority of which are, Nazis. That's the way that Singh regards his putative fellow Canadians. This is from newswars.com. Paul Joseph Watson, the South African doctor who first discovered the Omicron variant, says she was pressured by European governments to not reveal that it was mild. Angelique Coetzee let slip the bombshell revelation during an interview with Germany's Welt. I was told not to state publicly that it was a mild illness. I have been asked to refrain from making such statements and to say that it is a serious illness. I declined. Well, good for her. And is there anything happening in my own province where the sanitary dictatorship is set to end June the 30th? Yeah, that's right. June the 30th. Because Dr. Bonnie Henry, our chief latrine walla, just can't be too careful. You can never be too careful. If you have to destroy society and terrorize millions and demonize millions and, destroy the economy, well, that is the price that must be paid. It's the price that must be paid. Because, long COVID or whatever. This is from Chris Fox at CP24. Ontario's death toll from COVID-19 has reached a new milestone, even as hospitalizations and case counts continue to decrease. The Ministry of Health reported another 52 deaths on Friday as the total number of fatalities related to the virus surpassed 12,000 for the first time. And once again, how many people? 12,000. Keep that number in mind. How many people live in Ontario? Keep in mind, we're 2 years in now, okay? And the number is 14.9 million people. So 12,000 people have died, related to COVID-19 over 2 years. So we can see just how catastrophic this has been. Let's look at the latest numbers, and the numbers of new infections are, cratering. 2,907 new lab-confirmed cases of COVID-19 over the last 24 hours with a positivity rate of 11.7%. And are we going to get the numbers of how many of these many new cases? are fully vaccinated, and about half of them now boosted. No, they're not going to give us that. Canadian press, it goes back and forth on this. I guess it's simply become just too embarrassing to note the, shall we say, efficacy problems of the mRNA treatments. That's what I'm going to call them, because that's what they are. The Centers for Disease Control had to officially but quietly change its definition of what constituted a vaccine. This is from InfoWars, and it's about Doug Ford, who decided to go snowmobiling. I don't care. No skin off my nose. But, since this is a state of emergency, shouldn't he be out of his office? No, he doesn't need to. He doesn't need to. Again, this is from, is this from this? No, this is from Aidan Salazar at InfoWars. A reporter pressed Ontario Premier Doug Ford Friday on why he decided to vacation if Ottawa was reportedly under siege by the insurrectionist trucker freedom convoy, as described by police. There's been a lot of questions about you and your visibility, said a CTV reporter Colin DeMello. Premier CTV News has obtained photos of you in cottage country. We've spoken with people who took pictures with you who say you were snowmobiling on Saturday. Can you explain why you decided to go snowmobiling during a stated insurrection and siege in Ottawa? Ford ignored the reporter's question and instead responded that he speaks with high-level government officials all hours of the day. Fair enough, but you're not dismissing what I'm saying here, the reporter said. I'm asking you, Premier, were you snowmobiling on Saturday in cottage country while Ottawa was under siege, as you say? I take calls till 1 o'clock in the morning. I get calls before 6 o'clock in the morning. You know what? I don't believe him. I really don't believe that Doug Ford is putting 19-hour days. For one thing, his health would not allow it. He is morbidly obese, and I suspect that he probably has significant respiratory problems already. The governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer, who has a strange, waxy face. People have suggested this has Botox related. Trent Baker at Breitbart reports that Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer Friday criticized conservative media members for, quote, inciting and encouraging people to break the law, unquote, with their coverage of the Freedom Convoy. Obviously, we cannot incite and encourage people to break the law, especially when it means they are throwing other Americans out of work and creating an economic crisis that we were just recovering from. Again, urge to do something in Minecraft Rising. Oh, now Gretchen Whitmer is worried about the economy. Is she? I'm just amazed that they're trying to get away with that. Absolutely amazed. This is from Joshua Rhett Miller at the New York Post. Actor Ricky Schroeder has called on U.S. truckers to shut down Washington over COVID-19 vaccine mandates as he praised Canada's Freedom Convoy truckers. The 51-year-old former Silver Spoon star laid out his support for the ongoing protests in the North in a lengthy video to his 69,000 Instagram followers on Wednesday. I think we see what we're facing here, Schroeder said. It's an evil that is trying to be forced upon our children, upon us, and God bless the Canadian truckers and the Canadian cowboys up there on the border, unquote. Schroeder said he's heard there's great potential of similar protests unfolding in the United States, where truckers and other vaccine mandate critics may reportedly descend upon Washington, D.C. and state capitals as early as Super Bowl Sundays. Well, given what happened to Ashley Babbitt and others on January 6th, I don't know that Washington, D.C. is such a good idea because the Capitol Police shoot to kill. Oh, and in other countries, this is from Nathaniel Charles at Breitbart. An estimated 1,500 pro-freedom demonstrators continued to rally outside the New Zealand Parliament Friday in defiance of the police and the government. They gathered in what was described as a carnival atmosphere just 24 hours after some 120 of their number were arrested and demoved. removed. After witnessing the shocking footage of how New Zealand's police handled the protesters who were initially supported by politicians and allowed onto the lawn outside the Wellington Parliament alongside the mass arrests, including a lady who was dragged naked by her hair across the lawn by the police, the Freedom Convoy crowd has now increased from 200 to 1,500. Reports have emerged the protesters have repitched new tents after police initially confiscated some, as well as erecting a marquee to protect themselves from forecast rain, and some have even set up portaloos, according to the New Zealand Herald. And in Australia, this is from Kane at Citizen Free Press, who embeds a tweet by Evelyn Ray. Every entrance to the meeting point in Canberra for the Freedom Convoy rally tomorrow is at a complete gridlock. Cars by the thousands are arriving. Courage is infectious. Busloads of Australians have just arrived in Canberra. And let's take a look at Steve Kirsch's Substack. Is the world's best female skier, Michaela Schifrin, vaccine injured? My followers sure think so. How else can you explain all of the mishaps? Santa Clara County Health Officer Sarah Cody's latest press conference, where she won't lift her useless mask mandate. And let's go to Eugippius and his Substack. N95 basketball. Yes, we had Olympians? We had women's hockey teams playing in N95 masks. Mask basketball at Boston University. Googling shows the superstition is not unique to ASU. That'd be Arizona State University. Yeah, it's too funny. And let's go to Alex Berenson, who has been one of the great heroes of this sorry period in world history. And hey, Twitter. Funny story, Twitter no longer calls my final tweet misleading. Here's what Twitter warning said the night Twitter suspended my account. And I'm not going to repeat what Berenson said, even though it is the truth. And it comes from CDC's own figures. This tweet is misleading. Learn why health officials recommend a vaccine for most people. Berenson comments, media outlets all over the world refer to that tweet. The Daily Mail even ran it as a screenshot. And here's what it says now. Learn why health officials recommend a vaccine for most people. See, not misleading anymore. Of course, aside from Twitter itself, I'm the only one who can see the fact Twitter is no longer directly attacking what I said. Yeah, here's what it says now. It just says account suspended. He's suing Twitter, of course, for being knocked off Twitter. It'll be interesting to see how that goes. He has a great post. The Contagion of Contagion, the text for our COVID response turns out to be a 2011 movie starring everyone's favorite goop peddler. Remember how the pandemic started? The virus came for the young first. The hot model in London, the adulterous wife in Minneapolis, the highly fit guy in Hong Kong, oh so healthy and young. Then they got infected and died. They had seizures or something. It's hard to tell exactly how the virus killed them, but they definitely died. Worst of all, the adulterous wife gave the virus to her stepson. He died too, but not before giving it to lots of other kids. I remember it like it was yesterday, a terrible time. We were right to be afraid. We needed to be afraid. We needed to trust the Centers for Disease Control to save us all, and it did. We definitely didn't listen to the grifting blogger who was making millions of dollars peddling false hope. Wait a minute, that wasn't COVID, that was Contagion. Easy mistake. Contagion came out in September 2011. I saw it years ago. Can't remember exactly when. Maybe on a plane. It's a great plane movie. The plot clicks along, but if you miss a minute, no big deal. Yep, the virus is still virusing, and the scientists are still sciencing. So many stars, too. Gwyneth Paltrow, Matt Damon, Jude Law, Kate Winslet, and Bryan Cranston, and Lawrence Fishburne, and Marion Cotillard. And normally getting all those names in one movie would be tough, but Contagion had an edge. It's what Hollywood calls a message picture, and the message was this: trust the science, and especially the bureaucrats. Berenson confesses, I watched Contagion again a couple of weeks back. Call it research, because it was. The movie turns out to be a critical milestone in the development of the pandemic to come. For generations, public health experts had encouraged restrained government responses to epidemics. The conventional wisdom was that so-called non-pharmaceutical interventions like quarantines, travel bans, school closures, and mandatory tracing probably wouldn't help much. Even if they did, they risked stigmatizing infected people and came with huge costs to society. After the anthrax attacks of 2001 and the SARS epidemic of 2003 to 4, a new group of experts came along. Never mind that for all the attention they received, anthrax and SARS combined killed fewer than 800 people worldwide, fewer than the number who die of tuberculosis every 6 hours. Never mind that the world had made steady progress on the most dangerous infectious diseases, eliminating smallpox and even turning HIV into a manageable threat, or that it had not suffered a truly serious influenza epidemic since 1918. To these new experts, all the good news was actually bad news. We needed to be very afraid. The perfect virus, the perfect mix of transmissibility and lethality was out there, even if we couldn't find it. Yes, less death now just equaled more death later because science. They even came up with a cool name for it, Disease X. X marks the spot. Berenson continues, put aside for now what this doomsday attitude meant for viral research both in labs and on the ground, or how it intersected with accelerating changes in biotechnology and genetic research, or how it slowly seeped into government planning for potential epidemics, or how its most ardent advocates gained the backing of some of the world's wealthiest people. Focus now on just one point. The new experts were frustrated with the public's disinterest, it should be uninterest, in non-existent pandemics. This myopia made raising money for their work harder, and their work was expensive. They complained privately and publicly. It's easy to forget about the public health and the threat of emerging infectious diseases, one wrote in The Atlantic, inevitably. How could they make the Perols see what wasn't there? Contagion was part of the answer. It wasn't just another thriller. It was a lavishly produced call to antiviral arms with Matt Damon. Experts on virology and infectious disease, as well as the World Health Organization, even worked with the filmmakers to make sure the script was accurate. You will never guess who comes off amazingly well in Contagion. Yep, the heroes are all either virologists or health bureaucrats, and not just any health bureaucrats. Health bureaucrats at the highest level, the ones who work for the Centers for Disease Control and the World Health Organization, or both. They tell the dumb state health department bureaucrats what to do. They get kidnapped by the Chinese, but only for the best possible reason. They sacrifice themselves for the greater good. Meanwhile, the public steals food and riots. Even nurses don't get a break. One of the movie's plot points is that they go on strike because they're too afraid to work. Berenson continues, what is funny, not funny about Contagion is how real it feels and how false it turned out to be. The movie puts its thumb on the scale in ways large and small. Its MEV virus has an incredibly high infection fatality rate, up to 30%. Thus, 3 out of every 10 people who are infected with the virus die, young and old alike. They go from well to sick to dead in a couple of days, but for most of that time have only mild symptoms, thus the seizures, and thus the very high R0. Contagion is also weirdly obsessed with the idea of fomites, transmission by touch. The bigger a problem fomite transmission represents, the more effective, reasonable social distancing is likely to be. The most accurate part might be the vaccine development schedule. It goes like this. A successful test in 1 monkey, followed by a test in 1 human, the brilliant CDC researcher who came up with the shot, followed by distribution to 8 billion people. More or less how Warp Speed went. Only those guys were wise enough not to try the miracle jabs on themselves first. Also, I missed the part in the movie where drug companies made $100 billion selling shots with liability-free guaranteed contracts. Contagion does have one actual villain, though. He's a journalist, but he's really just a blogger. Ugh. When we first meet him, he's begging the San Francisco Chronicle to let him write an article. And he's a conspiracy theorist. And he's a lying liar. He tells everyone that an extract from the Forsythia plant will save them, but he doesn't believe it himself because bloggers, you know. And he's a grifter. He makes millions of dollars trading stocks in Forsythia companies or something. That part isn't totally clear either, but he gets arrested for sure. And he lets his pregnant girlfriend, die from the virus instead of giving her the Forsythia he knows doesn't work to save her. Worst of all, he talks too fast and he runs in a really weird way when the FBI come to arrest him for the securities fraud. Yeah, he's a bad guy. Even worse than Gwyneth Paltrow, who screws around on Matt Damon, poor, sincere Matt Damon. Though she works for a company that makes construction equipment to cut down trees, she pretty much deserves to die for causing global warming anyway. Yes, along with trust the bureaucrats, Contagion's lesson is clear. The internet is filled with liars. The people who made Contagion, Berenson concludes, were very proud of what they'd done and how accurate it was. They wanted us to know it was the future. Sure enough, they were right. And I want to talk about something different now. Weimar America. That's what Ryan Landry. He had a blog with that title before he translated to Weimerica is the contraction to the American Sun. And yes, hey, remember QAnon? You remember all that nonsense about pizza and the sinister nature of pizza and how perverts and pedophiles were using pizza as a symbol? How stupid, right? Can you imagine who could have believed that? Dr. Benjamin Braddock tweets, handout given to school children in Enfield, Connecticut, teaching them about sex and how to write emails like powerful people. And here's the brochure, or part of it. It's called Pizza and Consent. Consent is enthusiastic. It's a genuine yes and a strong want and desire from all involved. Fluid, because everything's fluid now. It's active and collaborative and can be given or taken away at any time. It's respectful and required. We can use pizza as a metaphor for sex! Exclamation point. QAnon, vindicated. When you order pizza with your friends, everyone checks in about each other's preferences, right? Some people might be vegan. Some people might be gluten-free. Some people might be normal. No, that was me. Others might love pineapple. Well, others prefer pepperoni. Yeah, I know how pizza works. Some might not like pizza at all. If you're a vegetarian, but your friend is okay. Let's move on to the next page. Personal pizza. Now, you know this metaphor for sex. Let's explore your preferences. Draw and color your favorite type of pizza. What's your favorite style of pizza? Your favorite toppings? What are your pizza no-nos? Now, mirror these preferences in relation to sex. Here are some examples. Likes, cheese, which equals kissing. Dislikes, olives, equals giving oral. Oh, okay. Wow, this went south really fast. And there's space for, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 32, 16 likes and 60 dislikes. Obviously, you might not be able to list all your wants, desires, and boundaries, but hopefully you start feeling more comfortable about discussing them. Because of who don't like pizza or sex at all, feel free to draw out another food favor to include non-sexual activities. Yeah, this is the sort of thing that the kiddies must be indoctrinated in, because sex is just like pizza. Everybody loves pizza, right? I mean, pizza goes with everything, just like sex. And how old do you have to be to enjoy pizza? I suspect there are, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3-year-olds who enjoy pizza. I mean, you can see where this is going, right? Everyone remembers what happened in 2016 with all of the talk about the Podestas and James Alefantis at Comet Ping Pong with his dungeon room there in the basement. Yeah, but no, see, QAnon, it's all nonsense. We don't have positions and people in positions of power who are perverts. No, 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 no. This is from Christopher Powell at the National Pulse. A recent high-level hire at the Department of Energy's Office of Nuclear Energy is a drag queen, alpha people activist, who has lectured on kink at college campuses and participated in interviews about fetish role play. In one interview, Sam Brinton, now a top Biden official, even discusses having sex with animals. Brinton, who has written in opposition to gay conversion therapy, was recently tapped to serve as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Spent Fuel and Waste Disposition in the Office of Nuclear Energy for the Department of Energy. He also goes by Sister Radioactive. Get it? His drag queen alter ego. In his own website's bio, Brinton reveals Sam has worn his stilettos to Congress to advise legislators about nuclear power, and to the White House, where he advised President Obama and Michelle Obama on alphabet people issues. He shows young men and women everywhere he goes that they can be who they are and gives them courage. Once, while he was walking around Disney World in 6-inch stilettos with his boyfriend, a young gay boy, saw Sam with his boyfriend and started crying. He told his mother, "It's true, Mom. We can be our own princess here." Brinton is an active member of the Washington, D.C. chapter of Drag Queen Society known as the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, which lists him as a principal contact on his 2016 to 2018 tax forms during the group's Lavender Mass 2021. I'm going to be talking shortly about a book about Satanism. And Satanism is real, and Satanism is here now. Someone mentioned on Twitter, even in Weimar, Germany, which is like the gold standard for decadence, these sort of things went on behind closed doors. And he was interviewed by Metro Weekly about pop play. I don't really want to talk very much about pop play because it is so, because it is so vile that a lot of people won't believe that it exists. Well, it does. And I don't know. I've long believed that insanity is a communicable disease, I suppose, as is sin. Okay, so you have the dominants and the submissives. Men are led around, they're wearing dog masks, and they're in leather fetish outfits. They're led around like animals. Oh, and they act like animals, and they whimper and bark. And sometimes when they're really naughty, they piss on the floor and they have to be chastised. In the interview in Metro Weekly, Brinton also appears to be annoyed with criticism of liking to have sex with animals. One of the hardest things about being a handler is that I've honestly had people ask, "Wait, you have sex with animals?" They believe it's abusive, that is taking advantage of someone who may not be acting up to a level of human responsibility. The other misperception is that I've had some really messed up background. Like, did I have some horrible childhood trauma that made me like to have sex with animals? Unquote. And there are many, many pictures of this fellow exercising his dominance over men, pretending to be dogs. Yes, James Alefantis, for those of you who didn't know or forgotten, he is some big, powerful person in Washington for owning a pizza parlor or 2 pizza parlors. And I spoke about him at great length in a podcast I did with Kevin Steele back in 2016. Ignore the lurid accusations about what supposedly went on at Comet Ping Pong in Washington. Just the things that Alefantis comments that he made on his Instagram account, sexualizing babies, sexualizing babies. Alefantis has posted a picture of a child with the caption, "Hotard," slang for hot retard. Oh, and then, yes, and tying up children, binding little children against tables. His pizza restaurant. I mean, everyone does that, right? Many, many Instagram comments sexualizing children. Picture of him holding a baby, and with hashtag chicken lover, which of course is gay slang for a man who likes younger men. This is like a 2-year-old he's holding. Picture of children with comment, "If they ain't bleeding, we're good." And of course, a pizza with it's carved, but in the shape of a pentagram. And oh yes, there's Marina Abramovich, who's an artist. She's in no way a Satanist, despite the spirit cooking that she is notorious for. And actually, this sort of thing is talked about at great length in Joris Karl Huisman's novel Là-bas. I don't want to be too specific because it is so disgusting. In April 2020, Microsoft released a promotional video for HoloLens 2, which featured Abramovich. However, due to accusations by right-wing conspiracy theorists of her having ties to Satanism, Microsoft eventually pulled the advertisement. Oh, we're just making soup, she says. Oh, and what are the ingredients of that soup? What are the ingredients? Well, you don't want to know, and I'm not going to tell you. A piece on the Catholic website, 1 Peter 5, Spirit Cooking, the Election or the Satanic in High Places. This is by our old friend William Briggs, statistician to the stars. Spirit Cooking, the Election or the Satanic in High Places. And here's a picture of Marina Abramovich, and she's holding a severed goat's head by the horns. And it's very, very bloody, this goat's head. And of course, it's just art. Severed goat's head, but what would be satanic about that? This is on the cover of Vogue Ukraine. Now, did Podesta and those in connection with him have a spirit cooking dinner in the manner described by Abramovich, or did they merely bless their asparagus, dedicating it to Mother Nature or some such other drivel? I have no idea, and neither do you. I'm guessing it was something along the lines of the latter and not the former, but who knows? It is really too depressing to imagine the former. And so is what is shown below. Confronting pain, blood, and physical limits of the body. Again, I'm not going to get into detail here. Abramovich, being famous, runs in high places, same as with the Podestas, our elite masters. More evidence Christianity is dead at the top. This bestial art, collected and proudly presented by the Podestas in their homes or in their offices, this is the sort of thing that not long ago would get them fired, banished from, I don't know, polite society. No longer. I was talking to Peter Brimlow today, and I'm going to have to retool my piece about Aaron O'Toole and the truckers to eliminate the stuff about the truckers, which I'm going to do over the weekend. But he reminded me about a story that Vidar had printed November 23rd of last year called Thy Hand, Great Anarch, is George Soros, a Sabbatean Frankist. This is by Lance Walton. I knew a little bit about this, but I was instructed further a few years ago by an Orthodox Jew who followed me on Twitter. And he pointed me, in many places. He was later banned by Twitter, of course, that Sabbatean Frankism, this monstrous satanic perversion of Judaism, well, it's been around for hundreds of years now. And according to my Jewish correspondent, it was, he saw it as a dominating trend in much of secular Judaism. Welton writes, there is a strain in Jewish theology that would make such sense of such behavior. Sabbatean Frankism, its followers pretend to be normal Jews or crypto Jews passing as Christians or Muslims while attempting to be as thoroughly evil as possible. Could this make sense of a life of a man who damages the interests of Jews, George Soros, just as much as he does those of European Gentiles? Well, as I've been saying for years, it is my very strong belief that after what he and his family went through in Budapest in 1944 and 1945, George Soros decided to devote or consecrate his life to the destruction of Western civilization. The movement can be summarized in the title of an essay on the topic Redemption Through Sin, Gershom Scholem, Master of the Kabbalah, by David Bialy. According to Jewish historians, in 1648, Sabbatai Zivai, a Turkish Sephardi rabbi, proclaimed himself the new Messiah and garnered an enormous following in the Jewish communities of Turkey and Eastern Europe. His movement was so influential that it culminated in Sabati asking the Sultan to hand him Jerusalem, although Sabati backed down to avoid being executed and converted to Islam for the same reason. According to historian Amir Engel, Sabati preached a Gnostic theology whereby the world was the province of an evil god. Sabati's followers were sparks of light of a good god imprisoned in the universe of this wicked deity. You could only be redeemed by breaking all worldly laws, meaning that you had to be as evil as possible and sow chaos whenever you went. With Sabati's apostasy, the movement died down, but some ardent adherents believed that Sabati was still the Messiah and that one should pretend not to be a Jew or not to follow his ideas while secretly following them. This was known as being a Donme. The Sabbatian movement was revived by a Polish Jew called Jacob Frank, 1726 to 1791. The son of a businessman, he met various Donme on business trips to Greece, and upon his return to Poland, came to the conclusion that he was the messianic successor to Sabbati Zivi. At his height, Frank had 50,000 followers in Poland and elsewhere. Frank took nihilism much further than Sabati, very much the Aleister Crowley of Jewish thought. Frank encouraged ritualistic orgies, enticing women to leave their husbands and breaking up families. After Frank's death, his children continued to lead the movement, and it supposedly still exists today, although with its Donme pedigree, it is extremely secretive. Some of Frank's sayings speak volumes. The way to life is not easy, for it is the way of nihilism, destruction, and it means to free oneself from all laws, conventions, and religions, to adopt every conceivable attitude, and to follow one leader step by step into the abyss. Well, speaking of that pop play fellow, who's now dealing with nuclear problems for the Biden administration, Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence. Haha, get it? Lavender Mass. Get it? This profaning of what is holy. And yes, to conclude this segment, Satan is real. I mentioned this woman, professional anti-racist, professional anti-white, Erica Eiffel, who was all over the Canadian media. She's a columnist for the Hill Times, and she has published essays in the Globe and Mail. White people are bad, white people are bad, white people bad, bad, bad. Everything bad on earth is due to white people. 2 days ago, she had a column in the Hill Times, "Those who can't hear must feel." It's so rare for political pundits to be right. Just look at Stephen Marr or John Ibbitson or Jesse Brown or Jen Gerson. But I can assure you that this is not the case for yours truly. I've been telling y'all. I'm sorry, people in my country don't say y'all. We are now into day 12 of the Freedom Convoy, scare quotes, which has turned into an occupation. Let me be clear. The capital city of Canada's downtown is under occupation by a band of white supremacists. And it wasn't difficult for them to do so. Let that sink in. And I've been writing about the threat of white supremacy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is a scam, okay? Because what is this woman Eiffel's primary occupation? Well, she created an organization called Dot in My Color. Welcome to the new normal. Build a business that's truly equitable. We are an intersectional business consultancy. We create inclusive organizations and implement solutions to dismantle systemic discrimination. Equity is the cornerstone of everything we do. It is what differentiates our work from the status quo approach of most firms. Our advisory services not only solve problems, they implement knowledge and build a learning community for leaders through our masterclass and various workshops. Yes, so companies presumably pay thousands of dollars to have this woman or people trained by her to rant about how horrible white people are and how equity, not the same as equality, you understand, equity requires that white people be pushed to the sidelines. And the Canadian media regularly gives this woman space to indirectly campaign for her business. You see, if Canada is wicked, 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 evil, 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 white, 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 well, then obviously, every company needs to take up the services of Not in My Color, right? I mean, this is perhaps even worse than the PR spiv scam the Canadian media has been running for years. Yes, they create a problem and then they offer the solution to it. And I'm going to look at the chat now. I'm running a little late, 9 minutes late. and then I'm going to move on to the book club. I'm not Canadian, and that last part about Indian alleged truckers has me viscerally angry, says John S. Gurning Quechulango. Yes, I love that word. Please Google DC Metro Police Officer Lila Morris. Absolutely the most horrific act in recent memory, says Jokokin at 666. Zen Master says the UK had a £20 million government program to teach Muslim women English who weren't allowed out of their homes. Who else do we have here? Do we have anyone new who I haven't called on? Hello to Jeez Histal. And hang on, I'm just scrolling down here. Just scrolling down. Private business model, to be honest, says Jeff Godley. The problem you're claiming to solve doesn't exist. Your metrics for success or whatever you say they are. Hello, Quachilango. Okay, so I have to open some tabs here, and then we'll talk about là-bas. And I suppose to the extent that people know about Huisman, or they remember him, it is because of a novel that he wrote called Arabur, or Against Nature, or Against the Grain. It is sometimes translated as this book. This decadent testament, as it was seen, created a sensation in the art world. I suppose, most famous example is Oscar Wilde rhapsodizing about it, or, the Dorian Gray rhapsodizing about it in The Picture of Dorian Gray. Joris Kaul Huisman was born in 1848 and died in 1907. And he was a civil servant, serving for more than 3 decades. Eventually, he was awarded the Legion of Honor for this. His supporters were somewhat angry that he was given the Legion of Honor for his drudgery as a civil servant and not for his artistic achievements. The strange name that he has is due to the fact that his father was Dutch. He had an unhappy childhood, stepfather. Just like Charles Baudelaire, many such cases. And he was brought up in a Catholic household, which he, like many adolescents, turned away from. So we know of Huisman. He was of the school, the naturalism school, and as such, he was under the spell of Émile Zola, who was the presiding genius of naturalism. And Zola was one of the greatest literary figures ever to arise in France. His novels are many, many novels, and a lot of them are really quite good. Zola, of course, reached his apogee of fame with his legendary essay in favor of Alfred Dreyfus J'accuse. Huisman, his first work was a novel called Marthe, Histoire d'une fille. It's about a prostitute. And the naturalists had a great deal of sympathy for the insulted and the injured of the world, to the extent that people became rather sick of it, actually. Novels used to be about aristocrats, and then they became novels about les miserables. So Zola took up Huisman, and that was a good patron to have. And he wrote many naturalistic novels, And then he decided that he had exhausted that vein. And Arabur came out, Against Nature came out in 1884. And it was what do they call it? A Société de Scandale. I recall years ago I was in London, and there was an exhibition at the British Museum, and it was either an exhibition about Leo Tolstoy, or it was an exhibition about Edison. But in any event, they had an Edison roll of Tolstoy. He was asked a question by an interviewer of what he thought about the decadent movement, and he thought about exactly what you might think that Tolstoy would think about the decadence. Yes. And of course, in Against Nature, we have the famous cork-lined room that Huisman shares a great deal in common with his protagonists, des Essence, the protagonist of Against Nature. He has a rather sensualist, very much a sensualist, but feeling, disgust with the world, or in disgust with a kind of world that would lead to, I don't know, such sensualism or the opportunities to practice it. And we see a lot in Huisman's works about the, fin de ligne, the end of the line. It's an exhausted aristocracy, an exhausted aesthetes, and even an exhausted Catholic Church. Now, there was a famous review of Arabur that said that Huisman was going to have to make a choice between the cross and suicide. And as it turns out, Huisman chose the cross, and it was very difficult for him. Going back to what I just said earlier, Barbey d'Aurevilly compared Huisman to Charles Baudelaire, saying, after Les Fleurs du Mal, the flowers of evil, I told Baudelaire, it only remains for you to choose between the muzzle of a pistol and the foot of the cross. But will the author of Arabur make the same choice? So most of Huisman's later novels are about his spiritual struggle. And the protagonist in Down There, là-bas, or The Damned, Durtal, is a somewhat thinly disguised version of himself. So là-bas, which came out in 1891, deals with a man who is, Durtal, who is rather at the end of his tether. And he comes out of the spell of a mysterious character who, you see, how this comes about is that Durtal is writing a book about Gilles de Rais, who is one of the most notorious people in history. He was a brave soldier, a great aristocratic family and fortune, and his deeds, his crimes, to this day, they really strain credulity. But this is all documented. Gilles de Rais he lived approximately from 1405 to 1440. And so we find out in là-bas that our hero is rather shocked to find out that he assumes that the Satanism and the monstrous behavior, the sacrilegious and horrifying ceremonies of de Rais, that they had rather died out since then. And his, his anti-Virgil in this novel assures him that this is not the case at all, that Satanism is very much alive, flourishing in France. And he gives examples of, he tells him what he knows, and so Durtal is drawn in by that. He is a questing man, and this eventually leads to his investigation and attendance at a satanic mass. This is a very literary novel in the sense that there is a great deal of discussion of literature in it. I have to say that the version of the novel, or the English translation of the novel, which is commonly available, that is to say, out of copyright, the translation was made a long time ago, and it's somewhat difficult to read nowadays. There is a translation by Brendan King. Well, actually, Robert Baldick, who wrote the standard biography of Huisman, which I highly recommend. Baldick translated a great number of Penguin classics, and Huisman was one of them. But that is still under copyright. There's a more modern translation published by Daedalus by Brendan King. Keen Wallace does the translation of the Dover edition, which is, as I say, out of copyright and easily available on the net. It seems rather, how would I say, rather pinched, rather old-timey now. But then again, when people complain about old translations, when people complain about, say, Aylmer Maugham's translations of Tolstoy, I think, here's a Victorian translating a Victorian. So perhaps that is appropriate. Here's how Labat begins. You believe pretty thoroughly in these things, or you wouldn't abandon the eternal triangle and the other stock subjects of the modern novelist to write the story of Gilles de Rais. And after a silence, de Hermes added. De Hermes is the anti-Virgil of this novel. I do not object to the latrine, hospital, and workshop vocabulary of naturalism. For one thing, the subject matter requires such diction. Again, Zola in L'Assommoir has shown that a heavy-handed artist can slap words together hit or miss and give an effect of tremendous power. I do not really care how the naturalists maltreat language, but I do strenuously object to the earthiness of their ideas. They have made our literature the incarnation of materialism, and they glorify the democracy of art. Say what you will, their theory is pitiful, and their tight little method squeezes all the life out of them. Filth and the flesh are their all in all. They deny wonder and reject the extra sensual. I don't believe they would know what you meant if you told them that artistic curiosity begins at the very point where the senses leave off. You shrug your shoulders, but tell me, how much has naturalism done to clear up life's really troublesome mysteries? When an ulcer of the soul, or indeed the most benign little pimple, is to be probed, naturalism can do nothing. Appetite and instinct seem to be its sole motivation, and rut and brainstorm its chronic states. The field of naturalism is the region below the umbilicus. Oh, it's a hernia clinic, and it offers the soul a truss. I tell you, Durtal, it's superficial quackery, and that isn't all. This fetid naturalism eulogizes the atrocities of modern life and flatters our positively American ways. It ecstasizes over brute force and apotheosizes, sorry, I have trouble with that word, apotheoizes the cash register. That word means to take it to the highest level, to the level of sainthood. With amazing humility, it defers to the nauseating taste of the mob. It repudiates style. It rejects every ideal, every aspiration towards the supernatural and the beyond. It is so perfectly representative of bourgeois thought that I might be sired by Holmes and damned by Lisa, the butcher girl in Ventre de Paris. Heavens, how you go after it, said Durtal, somewhat piqued. He lighted a cigarette and went on. I'm as much revolted by materialism as you are, but that is no reason for denying the unforgettable services which naturalism has rendered. It has demolished the inhuman puppets of romanticism and rescued our literature from the clutches of booby idealists and sex-starved old maids. It has created visible and tangible human beings after Balzac and put them in accord with their surroundings. It has carried on the work which Romanticism began of developing the language. Some of the naturalists have had the veritable gift of laughter. A very few have had the gift of tears, and in spite of what you say, they have not all been carried away by an obsession for baseness. Yes, they have. They are in love with the age, and that shows them up for what they are. Do you mean to tell me Flaubert and the de Goncourts were in love with the age? Of course not. But those men were artists, honest, seditious, and aloof, and I put them in a class by themselves. I will also grant that Zola is a master of backgrounds and masses, and that his tricky handling of people is unequaled. Then, too, thank God, he has never followed out in his novels the theories enunciated in his magazine articles. This novel is about many things. I mean, one of them is this question of style, this question of naturalism, or what we would call realism today. How useful is naturalism? How useful is realism in art? And we see in Là-bas, we see two kinds of conversion. We see a spiritual conversion. We see an artistic conversion as well. That I remember an old joke about naturalism. I think it was from the great, although neglected, English author, fin de siècle author, George Gissing. And it was about what a naturalist friend of his who proceeded to write the most realistic novel ever written. I'm just going to, show you what a man does, every day, a real man's life. And of course, it was the most boring, the most unreadable book ever written. So Durtal is an aesthete, like his doppelganger Des Aimés, and we see this tremendous tension between the two men because, in a way, they're kind of mirror images of each other. So Huisman gives a description of what he believes to be art. His ideal was completely realized by the primitives. These men in Italy, Germany, especially in Flanders, had manifested the amplitude and purity of vision which are the property of saintliness. In authentic and patiently accurate settings, they pictured beings whose postures were caught from life itself, and the illusion was compelling and sure. From these heads, common enough, many of them, and these physiognomies, often ugly but powerfully evocative, emanated celestial joy or acute anguish, spiritual calm or turmoil. The effect was of matter transformed by being distended or compressed to afford escape from the senses into remote infinity. Durtal's introduction to this naturalism has come as a revelation the year before, although he had not been so weary as now of fin de siècle silliness. In Germany, before a crucifixion by Matthias Grunewald, he had found what he was seeking. He shuddered in his armchair and closed his eyes as if in pain. With extraordinary lucidity, he revisualized the picture, and the cry of admiration wrung from him when he had entered the little room of the Castle Museum was re-echoing in his mind here in his study. The Christ rose above him, formidable, on a rude cross of barky wood, the arm an untrimmed branch bending like a bow under the weight of his body. This branch seemed about to spring back and mercifully hurl afar from our cruel, sinful world the suffering flesh held to earth by the enormous spike piercing the feet. Dislocated, almost ripped out of their sockets, the arms of the Christ seem untrammeled by the knotty cords of the straining muscles. The labored tendons of the armpits seemed ready to snap. The fingers, wide apart, were contorted in an arrested gesture in which were supplication and reproach, but also benediction. The trembling thighs were greasy with sweat. The rims were like staves or like the bars of a cage. The flesh swollen blue, mottled with flea bites, speckled as with pinpricks by spines broken off from the rods of the scourging, and now festering beneath the skin where they had penetrated. And I once had a print of this, a very, very large print, which I had framed in a plaster frame. Beautiful. Uh, it is a it is an enormously moving picture. In fact, if you have a reproduction of this in your room, your eyes will be drawn to it. I don't have it anymore, and I feel the loss tremendously. It's as if a missing limb, or at least a finger or so. What happened is that I moved from Vancouver to Edmonton, supposedly temporarily, and it was given away because apparently it was considered so baleful that it had to be removed. Huisman writes, this coarse, tear-compelling cavalry was the opposite pole from those debonair Golgothas adopted by the church ever since the Renaissance. This lockjaw Christ was not the Christ of the rich, the Adonis of Galilee, the exquisite dandy, the handsome youth with the curly brown tresses, divided beard, and insipid doll-like features, whom the faithful have adored for 4 centuries. This was the Christ of Justin, Basil, Cyril, Tertullian, the Christ of the Apostolic Church, the vulgar Christ, ugly with the assumption of the whole burden of our sins and clothed through humility in the most abject of forms. It was the Christ of the poor, the Christ incarnate in the image of the most miserable of us. He came to save, the Christ of the afflicted, of the beggar, and all those on whose indigence and helplessness the greed of their brother battens. The human Christ, frail of flesh, abandoned by the Father until such time as no further torture was possible. The Christ with no recourse but his mother, to whom, then powerless to aid him, he had, like every man in torment, cried out with an infant's cry. Well, one can see that Huisman one of his occupations was as an art critic, and you can see how much art moves him. But no, the Grunewald's crucifixion is absolutely magnificent picture. There are very few. There are very few like it, and you see that he talks about this picture because he is in a way comparing his own art to it. He doesn't want to wallow in the mire like the naturalists, but on the other hand, he doesn't like the superficial approach to not just art, but to life as well. This is a very strange novel in the sense that it is filled with strange people, grotesques even, like the bell ringer Karhai, who lives far up in a tower with his bells. And there's a vertiginous scene where describing the journey, the spiral staircase up to the lodgings of this strange man and his wife. They descended, and Karhai in silence opened a door. They advanced into an immense storeroom containing colossal broken statues of saints, scaly and dilapidated apostles, St. Matthew, legless and armless, St. Luke, escorted by a fragmentary ox, St. Mark, lacking a shoulder and part of his beard, St. Peter holding up an arm from which the hand holding the keys was broken off. There used to be a swing in here, said Karhai, for the little girls of the neighborhood, but the privilege was abused, as privileges always are. In the dusk, all kinds of things were done for a few sous. The curate finally had the swing taken down and the room closed up. And we see that Durtal, our hero, he rather envies this man, Karhai, with his bells, with his knowledge of the bells, of the beauty of the bells. The ring of that bell, monsieur, was like a voice from heaven, and suddenly he exploded. Bells have had their day, as I suppose Des Hermes has told you. A bell ringing is a lost art, and why wouldn't it be? Look at the men who are doing it nowadays. Charcoal burners, roofers, masons out of a job, discharged firemen ready to try their hand at anything for a franc. There are curates who think nothing of saying, need a man? Go out in the street and pick up a soldier for 10 sous. He'll do. That's why you read about accidents like the one that happened lately at Notre Dame, I think. the fellow didn't withdraw in time, and the bell came down like the blade of a guillotine and whacked his leg right off. This is a beautiful book. It's also, a terrifying book that one writing a book, doing all the investigation on a monster like Gilles de Rais. Well, as Nietzsche famously said, that when you stare into the abyss also stares into you. It's been said of this book that a lot of people are disappointed by it because I suppose these are actual Satanists or would-be Satanists who want to revel in things that are vile, disgusting, sacrilegious. It's not that sort of book, but again, that the knowledge that such men have existed and such men exist today, as we can see from the news every single day, gives one pause. This book là-bas down there was it preceded a trilogy that in which the character Durtal appears as the hero, and which describes Huisman's reconciliation with the church, eventually ending up taking minor orders and becoming an oblate. It is a remarkable book. I don't know, if nothing else, one learns a lot from it. One learns a lot of esoterica. But it's not so much that Huisman is fascinated with esoterica. It's just that he wants to show us how strange the world is, and it is very strange indeed. Modern man, rational man, thinks he knows and that he understands everything. Well, the more rational we become, the less we know and the less we understand. Those are my thoughts on Joris Karl Huisman's là-bas. And what is coming up on the book club next week? Hang on, just let me search for this here. Take a second. I normally have it pinned to the top, but I just thought I would start pinning the menu for today's show, or the daily show. Oh, a contemporary work next week, Paul Gottfried's Anti-Fascism, what we call Antifa. There's a long history. And so that's what I'm talking about on the book club next week. And what am I talking about on Theater Thursday? Hang on, where did it go? Yes, the movie, outstanding British movie from 1960, directed by Guy Green, called The Angry Silence. And on Music Monday, or whenever it appears, I'm going to be talking about the great band from Ohio called Peril. Let's have a final look at the chat. I feel that prints should always be the same size as the original, says True Greenberg. In the late 1970s, just before I moved out of the house where I'd stayed for several years, I'd been there as a foster child, and later, when I turned 18, I just roomed there. When I got my first apartment, I decided to fill it with art, if only art at second hand. And so I went to this place in Vancouver where they had catalogs of, great paintings, and high quality prints were available. And I had them framed by a professional framer. It cost me a lot of money, but it was well worth it because I have almost all of them to this day. Sadly, not the Grunewald, but I have works by, Munch and Odilon Redon and all sorts of people. Odilon Redon, the French artist, 19th century artist, one of my very favorites. You see a lot of his lithographs on the covers of Penguin classics. Very, very strange pictures. Thank you for your kind words, Sam B. And hello to Emmett Kelly's Earth. No need to apologize. True Greenberg says Particles is great. Oh, we're talking about Hwelbeck here. Platform is great. Submission was a bit boring. That's as far as I've gotten with Hwelbeck. Says True Greenberg. If you want interesting naturalism, read American Splendor, says Yo Mama. Oscar Toe says that he is a Balzac fan. Ed Apotheosis, that is. Yes, Ogan's Iron. I have no trouble with the word apotheosis. It's when you are adding to it that I have the problem. Huisman is a hard read for me, says Oscar Toe. Very decadent style of writer. I remember reading one book of his, an entire chapter was about the smells or odors. Dreyfus Affair seems like a manufactured controversy designed to push an agenda. Well, it wasn't a manufactured controversy, but it was used to push an agenda. I reviewed some time ago Pierce Paul Reed's excellent book on the Dreyfus Affair. Dreyfus was innocent. It's not only that he was innocent, but the French army knew very early on that he was innocent, but then decided it would be too embarrassing to admit their mistake. And so they doubled down again and again and again. With the result was that supporters of Dreyfus, not all of them, Dreyfus had Catholic supporters, but most of Dreyfus's supporters were atheists, Freemasons, the like. And that one of the results of the Dreyfus Affair was the suppression of religious orders in France and the seizure of all church property, including churches like Notre Dame, in 1905 by a government that actually was run by Freemasons. Yes, and it had a terrible effect on the army as well, because the army tended to be disproportionately Catholic, and there was a kind of war against Catholics in the French army. Extremely detailed and factual writing style about base subjects. French naturalist, says Ogan's Iron. I suppose that's true. I mean, one gets as great as Zola is. One gets the sense, unlike say in Balzac, that Zola is sort of waving it in front of your face. Ooh, look at these disgusting things that go on right under your nose, and you don't like to be reminded about them. But I am going to remind you about them. David the Gnome says it's actually kind of strange how NBC dropped off and its users kind of vanished. Well, NBC went private, 2 years ago or whatever? Yeah, it's private now. Wolf Barney says, whatever happened to Pleasure Man? Well, he's still running NPC. A bumbling American withdrew from the internet completely. Let's see, 5 years ago, say? It was sort of taking over. I know him a little, or did know him a little. It was sort of taking over his life, and his wife was very distressed about this. And at one point, he cut it all out, and then he came back, and he finally made a decision. I don't know how much his marriage was tested by this, but no, he was out for good, and he's remained out for good. And yeah, I miss him a lot. He was very funny, but very insightful as well. We've gone all. Oh, there we go. All right, that's it for this for today and for this week. I can't guarantee that I'm going to be back on the air on Monday because, of course, I really, really have to find an apartment as soon as possible. But I will be back as soon as I can, and I will miss you when I'm gone. Thank you all for tuning in. I really appreciate it. If you'd like to support this live stream with a donation, my PayPal account is linked to kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you're in Canada, donations may be made directly to the live stream via interact@kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do really wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.